She told me she was dying. I sold everything I owned to pay for her treatments. Then I found her at a coffee shop 3 towns over, perfectly healthy, with another man's wedding ring on her finger. Hello there, folks. Welcome back to After Her Lies. I'm Frank Morrison, and if you're new here, well, grab a cup of coffee and settle in. Because today I'm going to tell you about the biggest deception of my life. But before we dive into this mess, I've got to ask you something that breaks this old heart of mine. I see the numbers every week, and somehow 96% of you watching this are not subscribed. That's right, 96%. Now, I'm not asking for much here, just a little click on that subscribe button. It's free, and it helps an old man like me keep telling these stories. And while you're at it, give this video a like if it moves you, and drop a comment below. I read every single one, and they keep me going on the tough days. Now let me take you back to 1987. I was 34 years old, working as a foreman at the Consolidated Steel plant in Gary, Indiana. Good job, steady pay, and I thought I had my whole life mapped out. That's when Rebecca Martinez walked into Murphy's Diner on a rainy Tuesday evening in October. I was sitting at my usual booth, the one by the window where I could watch the traffic lights change colors through the rain, eating my meatloaf special and reading the sports section. The bell above the door chimed, and in she walked, shaking raindrops from her dark hair. She had these deep brown eyes that seemed to hold secrets, and when she smiled at Dolores behind the counter, something in my chest just stopped working right. She took the booth diagonal from mine, ordered a coffee and a slice of apple pie, and pulled out a worn paperback novel. I couldn't see the title from where I sat, but I could see her fingers tracing the words as she read, like she was memorizing poetry. Every few minutes, she'd glance up and catch me looking, and instead of being annoyed like most women would be, she'd just smile this mysterious little smile and go back to her book. I must have sat there for 2 hours, nursing the same cup of coffee until it went cold, just working up the courage to say something. Finally, as she was gathering her things to leave, I stood up so fast I nearly knocked over the salt and pepper shakers. "Excuse me, miss," I said, my voice cracking like a teenager's. "I couldn't help but notice your reading there. Any good?" She looked down at the book in her hands, then back up at me with those eyes that seemed to see right through me. "It's Steinbeck," she said, her voice soft with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. "East of Eden. Have you read it?" I hadn't, but I lied and said I had. First lie between us, though I didn't know then how many more would follow. We talked for another 20 minutes, right there by her booth. Her name was Rebecca. She was new in town, working as a medical technician at the hospital. She was 29, originally from New Mexico, and she had this way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. I asked if she'd like to have dinner sometime, expecting her to politely decline like they usually did. Instead, she wrote her phone number on a napkin with a pen she borrowed from Dolores and said, "Call me Friday. I'll be waiting." Those 3 days felt like 3 months. I bought East of Eden and read it cover to cover, twice, making notes in the margins like some college student. I called her Friday evening at exactly 7 o'clock, and we talked for 3 hours about everything and nothing. Her laugh was like music, the kind that makes you want to hear it again and again. Our first real date was at the Riverside Drive-In. We watched Dirty Dancing in my old Chevy pickup, sharing a bucket of popcorn and pretending we were paying attention to the movie. But all I could focus on was the way she hummed along to the songs. How she'd lean against my shoulder during the romantic scenes, the vanilla scent of her perfume mixing with the autumn air coming through the slightly open windows. After the movie, we drove down to the lakefront and sat on the tailgate, looking out over Lake Michigan. The moon was full that night, casting silver ripples across the water. "Frank," she said, and the way she said my name made it sound important, "I need to tell you something." My heart started racing. Here it comes, I thought. The boyfriend back in New Mexico. The complicated situation. The reason this beautiful woman was single. I haven't been completely honest with you, she continued, and I braced myself. I didn't just move here for work. I'm running from something. Someone, actually. She told me about Michael, her ex-boyfriend from Albuquerque. How he'd been controlling, possessive, sometimes violent. How she'd finally worked up the courage to leave in the middle of the night, taking only what she could fit in 2 suitcases. How she'd changed her last name and moved halfway across the country to start over. I understand if this changes things, she said, staring out at the water. I'm not the simple small-town girl you probably thought I was. I took her hand in mine. It was small and cold, and I could feel her trembling slightly. Rebecca, I said, we all got things we're running from. What matters is what we're running toward. She looked at me then with tears in her eyes, and I knew right then and there that I was in love. Not the puppy-dog crush kind of love, but the deep foundational kind that changes the architecture of your soul. We were inseparable after that night. She moved in with me after just 2 months, bringing her few belongings and a traumatized cat named Salvador, who hid under the couch for the first week. We fell into this comfortable routine. I'd get up at 5 for my shift. She'd have coffee ready by the time I stumbled to the kitchen. She worked the evening shift at the hospital, so we'd have lunch together most days, just the 2 of us in my little kitchen, talking about our plans. And we had so many plans. We were going to get married the following spring, have a small ceremony at the courthouse with just a few friends. We'd already picked out names for the kids we wanted to have. Sarah for a girl, after my grandmother. David for a boy, after her father who died when she was 16. We were going to save up and buy a little house with a yard where Salvador could chase butterflies and maybe a dog could join the family. The first sign something was wrong came in February. Rebecca started getting headaches, bad ones that would lay her flat for hours. She'd come home from work, pale and shaky, saying the lights at the hospital were too bright, the sounds too loud. I wanted her to see a doctor, but she kept saying it was just stress, just the long hours. Then came the dizzy spells. I'd find her sitting on the bathroom floor in the mornings, head in her hands, saying the room wouldn't stop spinning. The nausea started next, and I began to wonder if maybe we had a little surprise coming earlier than planned. But when I suggested a pregnancy test, she just shook her head and said it wasn't that. By March, she was missing work regularly. The hospital was understanding at first, but I could see the concern in her supervisor's eyes when she called to check on Rebecca. My beautiful, vibrant girlfriend was fading away before my eyes, and I didn't know how to help her. Finally, I put my foot down. Becca, you're seeing a doctor tomorrow, and I don't want to hear any arguments about it. She looked at me with those eyes that had captured my heart, but now they were filled with fear instead of mystery. Frank, what if it's something bad? What if it's really bad? Then we'll deal with it together, I said, holding her close. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. Dr. Patterson was our family physician, an older gentleman who'd been practicing in Gary for 30 years. He ran blood tests, ordered an MRI, did every examination he could think of. The wait for results was agony. Rebecca barely ate, barely slept. She'd wake up in the middle of the night crying, and I'd hold her until dawn, whispering promises I hoped I could keep. The call came on a Thursday afternoon in April. I was at work, operating the crane that moved steel beams from the loading dock to the fabrication floor, when Jim Bradley, the shift supervisor, tapped me on the shoulder. "Frank, you need to take this call. It's urgent." My hands were shaking as I picked up the phone in the supervisor's office. Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. "Frank, you need to come home. Dr. Patterson called. We need to talk." I broke every speed limit between the plant and our apartment. I found Rebecca sitting at the kitchen table, still in her pajamas, Salvador curled in her lap. The test results were spread out in front of her like tarot cards predicting a terrible future. "It's a brain tumor," she said without looking up. Glioblastoma, stage 4. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat down heavily in the chair across from her, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. What does that mean? What are the options? She finally looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not just fear, but resignation. It means 6 months, maybe 8 if I'm lucky. There's surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, but Dr. Patterson says it's aggressive. Very aggressive. The next few hours were a blur. Phone calls to specialists, insurance companies, Rebecca's family in New Mexico. Her mother cried so hard I could hear her through the phone from across the room. Her brother Carlos said he'd drive up from Albuquerque to help however he could. But Rebecca didn't want to wait. She wanted to fight, and she wanted to fight hard. Frank, Dr. Patterson gave me the name of a specialist in Chicago. Dr. Elizabeth Chen. She's doing experimental treatments, clinical trials. It's expensive, and insurance might not cover all of it, but if there's a chance, we'll find the money, I said without hesitation, whatever it takes. Dr. Chen's office was in one of those gleaming medical buildings downtown, all glass and steel, reaching toward the sky like a tower of hope. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 40s, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. She reviewed Rebecca's scans and test results with the focused intensity of a general planning a battle. "I won't lie to you," she said, pointing to the shadows on the MRI images. "This is aggressive, and it's in a difficult location. But we've had some promising results with a combination therapy I'm pioneering. Surgery to remove as much of the tumor as possible, followed by a targeted radiation treatment and a new chemotherapy protocol that's shown promise in similar cases." "What are we talking about cost-wise?" I asked, though I'd already decided it didn't matter. "The surgery and initial treatments will run about $60,000. The experimental drug therapy, if you qualify for the trial, would be another $40,000 over 6 months. I know it's a lot, but—" "We'll do it," Rebecca said, reaching for my hand, "whatever it takes." I liquidated everything. My savings account, my retirement fund, the money I'd been setting aside for our wedding, and the house we'd dreamed of buying. I sold my truck and bought an older one. I took out a second mortgage on the little house I'd inherited from my parents, even though it meant I might lose it. Rebecca's family helped as much as they could. Her mother sent $1,000 from her savings. Carlos drove up with his pickup truck full of Rebecca's childhood belongings to sell at the local flea market. Every dollar mattered. The surgery was scheduled for May 15th. The night before, we sat up late in the hospital room, talking about everything except what was happening the next day. Rebecca had insisted we get married before the surgery, just in case, so we'd had a quick ceremony in the hospital chapel with Dr. Chen and a nurse as witnesses. It wasn't the spring wedding we'd planned, but when Rebecca said "I do" in her hospital gown, with her head already shaved for surgery, she was the most beautiful bride I'd ever seen. "Frank," she said as we lay in the narrow hospital bed together, "promise me something. Anything. If this doesn't work, if I don't make it, don't spend your life being angry. Don't let this make you bitter. Find someone else to love. Have the family we talked about." "Don't talk like that," I said, but she put her finger to my lips. "Promise me." "I promise," I whispered, though I knew it was a lie. The surgery lasted 8 hours. I wore a path in the waiting room carpet, drinking terrible coffee and watching the clock move with agonizing slowness. Dr. Chen finally emerged at 6 in the evening, still in her surgical scrubs, looking exhausted but cautiously optimistic. "We got most of it," she said, "about 80%. The location made it impossible to remove everything without risking significant brain damage, but it's a good result. Better than I hoped for." The next few months were a grueling routine of treatments, doctor visits, and gradual recovery. Rebecca lost weight, lost her hair, lost her energy, but not her spirit. She'd joke with the nurses during chemotherapy, encourage other patients who were struggling, plan for the future like she was absolutely certain she'd have one. The experimental drug treatments were showing promise. Her latest scans in August showed the remaining tumor had stabilized, maybe even shrunk slightly. Dr. Chen was cautiously optimistic. Rebecca was talking about going back to work part-time in the fall. We celebrated our 3-month wedding anniversary with dinner at Murphy's Diner, the place where we'd first met. Rebecca was wearing a colorful scarf to cover her bald head, but her eyes had regained that sparkle that had captivated me 10 months earlier. She looked beautiful, hopeful, alive. "I think we beat it, Frank," she said, cutting into her apple pie. "I think we actually beat it." That night, for the first time in months, we made love like we were planning to live forever. The call came 2 weeks later while I was at work. Rebecca's voice was shaking. "Frank, Dr. Chen wants to see us tomorrow. She got the results from my latest scans." I knew from her tone that it wasn't good news. The tumor had not only grown back, it had spread. The experimental treatments had stopped working. Dr. Chen estimated we had maybe 2 months left, possibly less. "There are other options," she said gently. "More aggressive chemotherapy, but the side effects would be severe, and honestly, the chances of meaningful extension of life are minimal." Rebecca was quiet for a long time, staring at the new scans showing the shadows that were stealing her away from me. "I want to go home," she finally said. "I want to spend whatever time I have left at home with Frank and Salvador." We set up a hospital bed in our living room so she could see out the window, watch the seasons change from summer to fall. Hospice nurses came by twice a week. Rebecca's family visited as often as they could. We had good days and bad days, but mostly we just tried to be together. She died on a Tuesday morning in early October, exactly 1 year after we'd met. I was holding her hand, telling her about all the things we were going to do together when she got better, even though we both knew there would be no getting better. Her last words were, "Thank you for loving me, Frank." The funeral was small. Her family came up from New Mexico, a few friends from the hospital, some neighbors who'd gotten to know her during the months when she was too sick to work. We buried her in Graceland Cemetery, under an oak tree that was just starting to turn colors. I thought that was the end of the story. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life missing her, but at least I'd have the comfort of knowing I'd done everything I could, that our love had been real and pure and good. I was wrong. 3 months after the funeral, I was finally starting to go through Rebecca's belongings. I'd put it off as long as I could, but the house felt like a shrine, and I knew it wasn't healthy. I started with her dresser, carefully folding her clothes to donate to Goodwill. In the bottom drawer, underneath her winter sweaters, I found a manila envelope I'd never seen before. Inside were documents, legal documents, and they told a story that shattered everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd married. There was no Rebecca Martinez from Albuquerque, New Mexico. The Social Security number she'd used belonged to a woman who had died in a car accident in 1985. There was no abusive ex-boyfriend named Michael. There was no job as a medical technician at our local hospital, at least not under the name Rebecca Martinez. But there was a marriage certificate, dated 1984, from Phoenix, Arizona. Rebecca Maria Santos, married to Thomas William Chen. Dr. Chen. Our Dr. Chen, the specialist who had treated her for the brain tumor that was supposedly killing her. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. There were letters too, love letters from Thomas to my darling Rebecca, talking about their plan, about how much money they could make, about how sorry he was that she had to go through with it, but that it would all be worth it in the end. The last letter was dated just 2 weeks before Rebecca's supposed death. "The life insurance policy is in place," it read. "50,000 plus whatever you can get from the mark. After the funeral, lay low for 6 months, then we can be together again. I love you, and I'm proud of how well you're playing your part. I sat there on our bedroom floor, surrounded by the clothes of a woman who had never existed, reading about a scam so elaborate and cruel that I couldn't quite believe it was real. The brain tumor, the treatments, the experimental drugs, the gradual decline, the death I had witnessed with my own eyes. All of it fake. But how? How do you fake a brain tumor? How do you fake MRI scans? How do you fake dying in someone's arms? The answer was in the last document in the envelope. Medical records, real ones, from Phoenix General Hospital. Rebecca Santos had indeed been diagnosed with a brain tumor, glioblastoma, in 1983. She had undergone successful surgery and treatment. The tumor had been completely removed. She had been declared cancer-free in early 1984, shortly before her marriage to Dr. Thomas Chen. They had used her real medical records, her real scans, to create a false diagnosis. They had replicated her successful treatment, pretending it wasn't working. They had used drugs to simulate the side effects of chemotherapy. And when it came time for her to die, they had used some kind of sedative to make her appear dead, at least long enough for me to call the coroner. The body we buried wasn't Rebecca at all. I don't know whose body it was, and I don't want to know. I drove to Phoenix that weekend, operating on a mixture of rage and desperate hope. If she had faked her death, maybe she was still alive. Maybe there was some explanation, some reason that would make this all make sense. I found them at a coffee shop near the medical center where the real Dr. Chen worked. She was sitting across from a man I recognized from the photo on his desk in Chicago. The photo I'd assumed was of his brother or cousin. She looked exactly the same, healthy and beautiful, wearing a wedding ring I'd never seen before. They were laughing about something, holding hands across the table like newlyweds. She looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, and the color drained from her face. I walked over to their table on unsteady legs. "Hello, Rebecca?" Or should I say Mrs. Chen? The man I'd known as Dr. Elizabeth Chen was actually Dr. Thomas Chen, Rebecca's husband, a psychiatrist who specialized in something called conversion disorder, helping people who believed they were physically ill when their symptoms were actually psychological. He'd created an entire fake identity, complete with medical credentials and office space rented under a false name. "Frank," Rebecca whispered, her voice the same voice that had whispered "I love you" as she supposedly died in my arms. I can explain. But she couldn't. Or wouldn't. They ran, both of them, leaving me standing there in the coffee shop with a $20 bill on the table and a shattered heart in my chest. I never saw them again. I reported the fraud to the police, but tracking down people with multiple fake identities and resources is harder than you might think. The FBI got involved eventually, but by then the trail was cold. They'd taken my money, my trust, and a year of my life, and disappeared into whatever new identities they'd created for themselves. I moved away from Gary after that. I couldn't stand to be in the house where we'd lived, couldn't walk past Murphy's Diner, couldn't drive by the cemetery where a stranger was buried under Rebecca's headstone. I moved to Denver, then to Portland, then finally settled here in Tucson, where the desert heat reminds me every day that I'm still alive. I never did remarry. I never had those children we'd planned and named. I kept the promise I'd made to a dying woman who was never dying. And I spent my life alone rather than risk loving someone who might destroy me again. For 34 years, I carried this story inside me like a poison. I told no one, not friends, not therapists, not the occasional women who tried to get close to me and couldn't understand why I always pulled away just when things started to get serious. Then, 2 years ago, I discovered YouTube. I was looking for videos about woodworking, trying to learn a new hobby to fill the endless hours of retirement, when I stumbled across channels where people told their stories. Real stories, painful stories, stories about betrayal and heartbreak and the ways people hurt each other. I realized I wasn't alone. There are thousands of us out there, people who've been deceived by those we trusted most. And somehow, telling my story, sharing it with all of you, has started to heal something in me that I thought was permanently broken. Which brings me back to where we started. That subscribe button, folks. I know I sound like a broken record, but when I see that 96% of you are watching these stories without subscribing, it genuinely makes this old man sad. Not because I need the numbers, but because I feel like we're building a community here, a place where people can share their truth and find some comfort in knowing they're not alone. If my story has moved you, if it's made you feel less alone in your own pain, please take a second to subscribe. Hit that like button if you can. And please leave a comment below, tell me your story, or just tell me you're listening. Sometimes that's all we need to keep going, just knowing someone out there is listening. I've got more stories to tell, folks. 34 years of silence have given me a lot to say. And maybe, just maybe, by sharing our truth, we can save someone else from the lies that nearly destroyed us. This has been Frank Morrison, and this is After Her Lies. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.